Welcome to Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge, Indian River County, Florida, just outside of Vero Beach, South Florida, on a chilly, breezy January afternoon. Sunny, mid-50s, but it is chilly out here, especially for South Florida. I'm here during an unusual cold snap in 2023. Now, this could be considered the Yellowstone of the National Wildlife Refuge System, because this is the very first National Wildlife Refuge here, Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge in South Florida, created by Theodore Roosevelt in 1903, really as a bird preserve, because what was taking place at that time was called plume hunting. The plumage, the feathers of birds, were being used in women's hats for fashion, and plume hunters were coming down to South Florida by the hundreds and killing thousands of wading birds and pelicans and all kinds of birds that were nesting and wintering and living here in southern Florida to pull out their feathers and use them for women's hats in the fashion industry back in the Northeast. So the populations were being devastated. This is also what created the Audubon Society and in many ways the modern conservation movement, which is really focused on protecting wildlife and wildlife habitat. And again, in 1903, to provide a sanctuary here in South Florida for all these wading birds, the great blue heron and the snowy egret and the great egret and the reddish egret and the brown pelican, white pelican, roseate spoonbill, wood storks, all of those sort of really large, dramatic, colorful wading birds. This sanctuary was set aside. It's grown to over 5,000 acres now. There's a number of different spots and islands and protected area in this back. We've got a wetland, obviously, a little bit of a lake here with some mangrove around and a lot of seaside oxeye native plants. At one point, this was a lot of citrus, but the area has been rehabilitated for nature. And it is, again, like I said, I guess this is the 120th anniversary here of the National Wildlife Refuge in South Florida. They've got another overlook tower here that is really fantastic. It goes up a couple of stories, but on the decking and the boardwalk, it lists all of the National Wildlife Refuges in the system by name, and there's over 500 of them, I believe, big and small, all across the country. Just about everyone in the United States lives within 50 miles. Even in New York, Washington, D.C., huge areas, Los Angeles, big metropolitan areas, there are National Wildlife Refuges nearby. Okefenokee Swamp is a National Wildlife Refuge a lot of people have heard of, all sorts of them in Alaska. Anwar, Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, you hear about that in the news a lot for oil and gas leases and different things of that nature. But this is the very first one, not a national park, but a National Wildlife Refuge. And again, those are set aside primarily for the protection of wildlife, and they're great to visit because they have the scenery and the wildlife, the photography opportunities, the bird watching, the hiking that the national parks have without so much of the visitation and the crowd. So if you're in Indian River County, Florida, here along the Treasure Coast, if you are anywhere near Vero, take a couple of hours and come out here to the Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge, the very first National Wildlife Refuge.